Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We begin with a story that, if you're kind enough to listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll know that in many ways, this is, for me, what politics and, dare I say, religion and campaigning, social justice, whatever words you want to put into that category, it's what it's all about. The notion that the circumstances in which you are born should not be the key defining factor of what transpires subsequently in your life, i.e. that where you end up should not, or I beg your pardon, that where you start off should not have a bigger influence on where you end up than just about anything else. There's a great line in the Times Diary today about, I'm not going to remember who they were, it was the former headmaster of a luminary. And he was just reflecting on how odd it was that 1,000 old Etonians every week stand in the chapel and sing about how important it is to sort of drag down the powerful and raise up the poor. And yet, of course, when they leave, many of them will be dedicating themselves to precisely the opposite. And it's not unique to Eton by any stretch of the imagination, but it does sort of highlight that sometimes a reluctant admission that if you're lucky enough to have a start in life like that, you're highly unlikely to blow it. You're considerably more likely to go further than someone who hasn't had that start in life. It's nothing to be embarrassed about or ashamed of, but I think it's probably something we should be honest about. We live in a country now where just 29% of people questioned by the Social Mobility Commission think that the United Kingdom is a country where everyone can succeed through talent and hard work. Perhaps even more worrying is the similar figure, a third of those surveyed, who said they could not save any money at all each month. But we've done a lot on that recently, the absence of savings for some 16 million British adults. This was commissioned and published, indeed, by the Social Mobility Commission, and it will be putting it to Parliament this morning. What angle do you want to come at this from? Because I'll tell you what angle I would like to come at this from. First of all, I'm a little bit puzzled by the 71% who apparently, unless I've misread the statistics, believe that we do live in a country where everyone can succeed through talent and hard work. But the really crucial question surely is, how do you improve it? How do you actually improve it? How do you make this a world in which the circumstances of your birth, the environment in which you're raised, is not the key signifier of where you end up in life? It's 7 minutes after 10. I'll be a bit personal and then you can be as well, or you can just sort of take an overview. If you wanted to live in a society where you had a fairer crack of the whip from the very start, what would you do? That's my first question, actually. If you want to spare yourself one of my interminable introductions this morning, you can pile in now on that. If you wanted to live in a fairer society where the have-lesses and the have-nots had a kind of better position at the starting line of life than the haves. I'm being simplistic. I don't want to overanalyze what I mean by these things. I think we've all got a fair idea. The starting line of life, it seems to me, is staggered. Do you remember at school when sometimes, or maybe not at school actually, it was usually at home when you were having a pretend sports day with your sister and all your friends, and you were all different ages and abilities, so you'd have a staggered start to the running race. Like it would be, Caroline, go now! And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Mark, go now! 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, James, go now! 11, 12, 13, 14, Luke, go now, because Luke was the fastest runner and Caroline, bless her, was the slowest. So you'd try and equal things out. You'd try and level the playing field by having a sort of staggered start in life. And unfortunately, I think socially speaking, we have a staggered start in life that has nothing to do with ability or potential and everything to do with possession and position. So it would be, Donald, go now! 1, 2, 3, 4. David, go now! 5, 6, 7. Everybody else, go now. But they're a bit miles ahead of us. We're never going to catch them running as fast as I can. I'm pegging it down this bed. I'm never going to catch these guys. The head start they got was huge. And I say to you again, because it's important to stress this, that you can't blame anybody for trying to give their parents their head start. But I think you have to acknowledge that it exists. That great phrase that I only learned in the course of the American presidential election sort of resonates through this story like Blackpool through a stick of rock, doesn't it? People who were born 3-0 up but think they scored a hat-trick. And I want to know how you could make that more equal, that's all. 0345 6060 973. Nearly half of UK adults, this is where things get even more interesting, nearly half of UK adults believe that where people end up in life is mainly down to their background and parentage. First of all, my phone lines are open now for someone who doesn't believe that. I would love to talk to you, because I don't want to be scorched earth on this and dismiss the disagreement. The idea that if you don't believe that where you end up in life is mainly down to your background and parentage, you can go first today. If you hit the numbers now, you'll be first up on the programme in a matter of minutes. 0345 6060 973. James, I don't believe that where you end up in life is mainly down to your background and parentage. Hit the numbers now. We'll speak in just a moment. But the bigger question for me is how you change it, how you redress it. I think when you're adopted, as I am, you perhaps spend a little bit more time imagining the road not taken. That old Robert Frost poem about two roads diverged in a wood and I took the one less travelled by. It's not about what I'm discussing today, but it's about the way your life might have gone if you hadn't gone down that route there, right? And when you're adopted, especially if you are my sort of age, and generally that would involve being adopted from a biological mother in a sort of mid-teens in rural Ireland, you do kind of wonder where your life might have ended up if you hadn't been adopted. If your background and parentage had remained the one that you were born with rather than the one that you were given when you were adopted. And as you know from listening to this programme, my parents gave me just about every advantage imaginable in life. And as a result of that, the paltry successes I've enjoyed, I am absolutely clear owe a hell of a lot more to the place on the starting line of life that they gave me than the quality of my spiked running shoes or my athleticism. I'd like to think I'd have done okay if I'd had to sort of fight my way up from the back of the field, but I can't say to you today with any confidence that I would have done. In fact, if I had to sort of describe the people I find most troubling in some senses, it's the people born with huge advantages who deny that they existed, the people born on third base who think they've scored a home run. I just don't quite see why you wouldn't want to give gratitude. It's quite a Christian thing. You just say thank you for the advantages you've enjoyed. So, would I be here today if I hadn't had the background and parentage that I had? No, of course I wouldn't. I got LBC. I might have like a sort of Street Fighter, have been able to sort of punch my way through into the talk radio universe. But half a dozen of the words I've used already in this introduction wouldn't have been in my vocabulary if I hadn't gone to the school that I'd gone to and read the books that I've read. I got into journalism shortly after all of my the strings I might have been able to pull through contacts had all sadly died or been made redundant. So I had to buttonhole the former editor or the editor of the Sunday Telegraph at the London School of Economics Catholic Society, not something I'd ever been to before, and I'd mentioned that he used to know my dad and could he possibly give me some work experience. Didn't lead anywhere except to meet another journalist who was on the Daily Express 2 years later and remembered me when I rang them up, still begging for a job, threw me a bone, got through the door, boom. But even though that didn't work, I think if I hadn't had the kind of confidence you sometimes get from background and parentage and schooling to actually march up to a dignitary and a luminary and say, hey, give us a break, mate. And they don't have to give you a break, do they? But ask 100 people to do so and one of them probably will. And then when I've ended up, weirdly, in positions of relative, I don't want to say power, but when I've been in a position to hire people and possibly, if I was a little bit more ruthless and talented, fire people as well, I was always amazed by how few people knocked on the door. So it's young people who say, oh, if you get the occasional email or letter that says, you probably get millions of these, but when I was show business editor at the Express, I only got 2 letters like that, and they're both now working journalists. I only got 2 letters saying, can I have some help? Can I have some work experience? 2. I did the job for 2 or 3 years. I forget how long, but I could name the journalist now. And they wrote to me and said, I imagine you get millions of letters like this. And I wrote straight back and said, actually, yours is the first, yours is the second I've ever received. Why don't you come in for a cup of tea and we'll see if we can help you. One of them came from a background very different from mine. One of them came from a Scottish single-parent family, and one of them came from a background more rarefied than mine, similar education, but more money in the family vaults. So it doesn't necessarily hold that the circumstances of your origins will determine the circumstances of where you end up. But I think we mostly recognise it. 0345 6060973. And if we find an exception, if we find a Charlie Mullins, for example, of Pimlico Plumbers, that doesn't prove that the system isn't skewed. You find one person who's managed to rise to prominence, in a system that is handicapped against the less privileged. It doesn't mean that the system doesn't exist. It just means that, every rule book's an exception. So, grief, is it 10:15 already? I do apologise. I've got a full switchboard. Lisa and Maureen will be up first in a moment. Remember, we're also, and I'm going to get you to do this on the text, decide whether you want to talk about the RSPCA or prisons later in the programme. I'm going to do this a bit more often, I think, let you decide on my third topic. But the number you need to talk to me about social mobility is 0345 6060 973. And remember, I'm really interested in what you do to make things fairer, as well as your thoughts on just how unfair things already are. 1019, nearly half of UK adults believe that where people end up in life is mainly down to their background and parentage. I am surprised that nearly half obviously don't believe that. What other examples, what other overriding truths can there be in the context of social mobility? Lisa is in Bromley. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time calling, so a little bit nervous.
It's only me.
Right. So basically what I think, I'm kind of a bit mixed at the moment, especially while I was just having a think. I do think, especially in this country, we do have so many opportunities, but because we've become so used to it, we've kind of become complacent. I'm not saying, say you were born to a working class family.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone who, has been privately educated, you may just have to accept that you might have to work 10 times as harder to get to where they are, but are you prepared to do that? The opportunities are there, but you're going to have to look harder and search a little bit more to find them.
Well, then it's grossly unfair, even if it's
But then everything is unfair. I mean, I actually grew up in Jamaica when I was younger. I'm third generation here, and I came back here when I was 14 in year 10 and went to school. And I just couldn't believe what everyone was like at school. Like, there was no one actually appreciated education. No one kind of understood what you had. Whereas in Jamaica, you find the poorest people who had nothing, they would actually fill the quotas in the grammar schools because they would work so hard. Some people will go home and study 4 hours a night because they can't afford a tutor, but they could go to the library and get a book to study to get to where they want to be. And I don't think over here...
But where do they end up? They don't end up in the main, running FTSE 100 companies, editing newspapers, High Court judges.
Well, actually, the last Prime Minister of Jamaica, for example, was someone who came from that scenario, a lady called Portia Simpson, from nothing, what you call country people in Jamaica, and she made it through hard work. I'm not saying, but it is unfair, so I do accept it is unfair.
What would you do to make it fairer? Just looking back to year 10, what could you have done then? The point you make is brilliant because...
people actually valued what they had over here in terms of education to actually make a difference. Everyone seemed very complacent, and I actually found myself dumbing myself down to fit in with everyone.
So we don't, and that notion, and that does depend slightly on your school. The better grammar schools, many private schools, they place a value on education that perhaps is absent from elsewhere. I don't know. I don't have the palette of experience to say that with certainty. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you want to grab Lisa's phone line. I'm going to crack on today, get as many voices on as possible. Maureen is in Gloucester. Maureen, what do you think?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
First time caller.
You're very
Sorry,
welcome.
I've got cold.
That's all right. I don't know what your voice normally sounds like, Maureen. You didn't, so you could have got away with that.
I could have got away with it. Sorry. Well, I suppose I've listened to conversations like this before, and I suppose it just, for me, where's the line of where you end up? How do we measure that? I mean, I'm one of three from a single parent family when it wasn't fashionable in the 50s, just with a dad who just instilled in us that if you wanted to get on and have money, you had to go to work. And I left school young.
Everybody knows that.
All of my life.
Yes.
And I think we've all, my two brothers, we've all retired a bit earlier because we've stayed in jobs, we've worked hard, we've got children who are university educated.
Are you ringing me as an example that it is down to background and parentage, or as an example that it isn't?
I think both, I think.
No, not allowed. No, not allowed. Pick a side.
It's not allowed, okay. I think it is down to background, and I think that could cover many things. It could be
this is why you're such a good contributor, because you say I'm one of three in a single parent family, so I mean on paper you'd be put at the disadvantaged side of the game.
Absolutely.
But you had a mother who was determined to push you and who believed that things were achievable.
No, it was a dad.
So I beg, was it really? A lazy presumption of me there. Hashtag everyday sexism. It was your single parent father who put you on this track, who put you on the path, and that means that it was down to your background and parentage. So you're right, actually. I apologise. I withdraw the claim that you can't be both. You clearly are both.
But the background could be many things, couldn't it?
Yes, of course it could.
The background could be many things. But I think part of my... I don't work anymore. I retired a bit earlier as well.
You mentioned that a few times, Maureen. No one likes to show off.
No. I was in a department. My last job was with the Department of Work and Pensions, and I worked mainly with young people. And I don't want to categorise them, but I think a lot of the problem is that there doesn't seem to be a need sometimes for young people to earn in that early formative years up to 18. You know, they were coming in, they'd been to university, they'd never had a job. They'd nothing to put on their CV, and I think parents sometimes, again, it's a background thing. Parents sometimes think, I don't want them to work. I don't want them to get the experience.
So you mean actually going out and earning a few quid long before school leaving age?
Yes, I mean a part-time job. You know, an employer.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree
employers.
with you.
We try to get them into work experience. I'm not doing work experience. I'm not getting paid. Well, your CV is going to continually be at the bottom of the pile because you've got 6 A levels, but you can't prove you can get up on a rainy day and come to work.
I take your point, although I'm in a bit of a tizzy today because I'm also in favour of Theresa May getting rid of unpaid internships on the grounds that some young people simply can't afford to give their hours for no money, whereas if you can stay in mummy and daddy's flat in Pimlico or stay with your godmother, then you can be an unpaid intern. When I was trying to get into journalism, it was a huge handicap that I actually had to pay rent and put food on the table. I couldn't go and do a month at Tatler without having to or actually I shouldn't mention Tatler because I never applied there. I don't know whether they pay their interns or not, but you take my point. The kids who could actually sustain a lifestyle without having to earn a crust had an even greater advantage than I had. So I like that, though, just the very simple relationship between work and reward. And that's why sometimes when you see these millionaires saying, well, I won't be giving my children any money, or I won't be giving them much, or they'll have to do this and they'll have to go out. You can, if you want, think, oh, you silly old sausage. What's the point of being minted if you can't buy your kids a Ferrari? But actually, they're buying into what you espouse, that you need to learn for yourself that sort of relationship.
That I'm not saying it's easy because it's not easy. There's lots of people who don't have parents who instill that in them, you know. And
what would you do to make it fairer? What would you do to make it fairer?
I don't know. I don't know. One thing: education.
Easily said. As I say it 3 times actually. It sounds like Tony Blair always used to do, but it doesn't necessarily deliver. Thank you, Maureen. 2 brilliant debutantes this morning. Jasmine is in Chesham. Jasmine, what would you like to say?
Hi, yes, thanks very much for having me on. Well, I grew up in a council flat, so I was in a very underprivileged in the beginning. My parents, they weren't given anything. Their parents were in a worse situation than they were.
Well, they were given a council flat.
But they were, so they were privileged in that aspect.
No, I'm not suggesting they were privileged.
They had a roof over their head.
Yeah.
But 20 years later, my dad's now built a business, all from scratch. They're now, they've now become quite wealthy. They've kind of changed their lifestyle completely. They've almost become middle class.
Have they pulled the ladder up?
They have, and I just think that, they weren't given anything. They weren't necessarily shown this is what you must do. And now when we look back, there are people and family that are still, they're almost living in exactly the same way we were 20 years ago.
So what's the difference then between your dad and them, the rest of the family? What's the big difference?
My dad, he just knew that if he wanted something, you have to work for it. If you aren't given it...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I know this isn't what you mean. I balk at those sort of comments because some of the people working hardest, most people in the city where I live, working 10, 15 times harder than I do in terms either of physical strenuous effort or hours on the clock will not be earning. I mean, if you're on minimum wage, I met a lad last night who works in IT all day, drives mini cabs at night. He's working incredibly hard just to keep his head above water, not to.
You know, I don't necessarily mean, you know, work. I mean, you know, it's not necessarily working physically hard, because I mean, I'm a nurse. I work.
Well, then you get it.
We get paid. I get it. You know, we work very hard for very little in a way. But I mean, work as in you have to not stop. You know, you kind of keep going, and you have to. You know, and I do think it. You know, someone mentioned earlier about, you know, if you've got a social class, you get the confidence to go and talk to other people.
That was
I think
me.
part of it is, it was you, yeah, there you are. And you know, it is about having that confidence.
But your dad got that confidence, did he?
He has.
Well, there you go. So that's the. Can you teach that?
Built it up. I think you just learn it. I think you have to. You have to start from somewhere, build it up.
Do you know what I
Make
think?
the connection.
I think you're right. I think everyone's going to be a little bit right and a little bit wrong today, myself included, because some people have it naturally. Some people just have chutzpah, don't they? Some people can walk into a room and light it up, regardless of what their background is or was or might be. But if you are lucky enough to receive a certain type of education, it doesn't have to be paid for. If you're lucky enough to receive a certain type of education, you can actually assume the mantle of confidence. You can actually pull it off, even when inside you're just as nervous and querulous as everybody else is. You know the importance of making eye contact and a firm handshake and standing in a certain way and working a room in a certain way, and that actually is going on my list. That's Jasmine and I make that contribution to the question of how you could make things fairer. Teach, it sounds odd, but teach social skills in schools. Teach social skills. Teach, not etiquette, I don't want you walking around with a book on your head, but social skills, for want of a better phrase, seems to be a big indicator of the difference in social mobility. Jasmine, thank you. You may be late for the news. Take that as a compliment. Leslie says, James, you may have missed part of the point. The young guy you met who works in IT and cabbies at night might be doing it to live now, but is more likely to be a success in the future than someone else who isn't doing that. You're absolutely right. Leslie, actually, because he was explaining to me that he bought a car shortly before buying a house, a slightly better car than he should have bought, and so his wife said, you're going to have to pay for the car, but it's because he'd bought a house that he was in the financial situation that he felt he had to go out and work 2 jobs, and by dint, of course, of being on the property ladder, he's moving into a shrinking minority of people. Can you believe that? Maybe not minority yet, but a shrinking constituency of people in this country. There will be fewer homeowners per capita when my kids are my age than there are today, and that's wrong. Something's gone backwards, and this ties in with everything, doesn't it? It ties in with Trump, to a lesser extent with Brexit, social mobility, dispossession. I wish, and I owe you such a massive apology for not calling this out sooner. Sometimes you just get so tired of hearing stuff that you know isn't really true, that you zone out the helpful ways of proving it. This notion of wage compression for the working classes and linking it to immigration and piling on yet again that suggestion that we're all worse off because of them over there. And then I suddenly realised about a month ago, wasn't it? You're probably listening, that I work in a profession where wages haven't moved for 20 years. And there just isn't any increase in wages. That has absolutely nothing to do with immigration. Saying that it was all about immigration has let the bosses get away with freezing wages. And I always think of my old newspaper, the Daily Express, which is, you know, absolutely out there now. Bonkers, pants down bonkers on these sort of stories. And the journalists there haven't had a pay rise for years. I mean, actually years. And yet they're still writing about how wage compression and wage stagnation has been caused without any evidence at all. They write this, except one Bank of England report that suggested it may have a tiny impact, specifically in the sector of care home workers and similar. Oh, it's all because of immigration that your wages are frozen. It's got Donald Trump to the White House, so you can't underestimate the power of the rhetoric, but you'll forgive me for sticking to the truth. 10:36 is the time. Alex is in Cardiff. Alex, what do you reckon? Background and parentage being more important than hard work and talent?
Hello there. First time caller again.
You're very welcome.
Just to go back to one of the other points that one of the other callers made. So they mentioned about education in schools, and I think that's a really good point, because I'm only 20 and I left school at 16, and my background was not full of money. You know, a lot of my friends had a very well upbringing, shall we say, and compare it to them at the moment. I've worked my way up through a telco company, and I'm doing very well for myself at the moment. But I think what is important is the aspiration. In terms of the money, is a huge impact on the aspiration of it as well. For example, as soon as I left school at 16, I was straight into work. I'm not saying that's what everyone should do, because I obviously understand that university is a very important thing. But we live in a world at the moment where jobs at the moment require a lot of experience along with education. So it's not necessarily 100% down to education. So I'd be interested in the 50% or so, I think you said, of people who thought it was down to upbringing. I'd be interested to see what percentage of them were people with a well upbringing.
Yes, I imagine. This is why my favourite phrase of 2006, well, actually there's too much competition to say that, but the idea of being born 3-0 up and thinking you'd scored a hat-trick, those kind of people, it had nothing to do with background at all. The reason why I'm running a FTSE 100 company, despite going to public school and at Oxford, nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with the fact that my parents were very, very driven, and my father also ran a FTSE 100 company. It's all down to my innate brilliance. They'll be quite well represented on that side of the table, I imagine.
Yeah.
What would you do? Make a list, mate, actually, and you tell me what would you rather have, okay? So, in life, if you were 16 again now, and you were starting off on a route that's already, proved successful for you, would you rather have rich parents, loads of talent, loads of confidence, an ability to work hard, or something else?
Right. Well, I think that again, it all depends on the age and all depends on where you're from.
16, you're Alex from Cardiff. It's you, mate, 4 years ago.
Right, okay. If I was 16, parents with a lot of money.
Yeah.
But now, obviously, it's talent, I mean, that, my mindset, that's the whole thing and trying to get back to is that if I had a lot of money at 16, or I didn't have a lot of money at 16, which I didn't, I think in those 2 years, it's key what actually happens in your life between 16 and 18 or that kind of gap, because I think that is where between 16 and 18 you've got responsibilities, but you haven't got 100% got responsibilities. So that part of your life, I think, is the key part, which either needs to be driven and show that you need to have drive in you to go far, and you need to have aspiration in that small window of your life, because I think everything up to 16, I was speaking to the teacher of the education system hasn't changed in a very, very long time, and I think it needs to be adapted to have even half an hour a week on real life situations.
Well, yeah. What do you mean by real life situations? Do you mean like interview skills and stuff like that?
So like interview skills, stupid little things like, when I was 18, again, I got into debt very quickly within 6 months. And I was very lucky to ring the money advice service, and they helped me out and everything. But I won't get into that too much. But I think if I'd been educated that at 16, so stuff like interviews, you go back to the eye contact thing. Now, I think that is one of the huge things that made me successful. Stupid little things like that, I think, made me go a bit further. Is just the fact that I knew how to make eye contact very well.
Now, do you know, I think you're absolutely right. I really do. It just is, and I don't know whether it's fair that that's the way it works, but actually I'm a product of the same environment, and it matters to me. I meet someone new, I shake their hand, and sometimes I'm bad at making eye contact, but I force myself to do it.
Yeah, I think that all that is on it. The first, at the moment in this world, first impressions are everything, because I train on a regional basis, and I meet new people every day, and I can tell the people who as a rule are going somewhere simply by the way they're making eye contact and their body language. You can at that age, at the age you are, and I agree with you on that. I tell you what breaks my heart is when you see 12 or 13-year-olds, and sometimes you can see them sort of dropping out of the race. You can see them, and whether you like it or not, I think ethnicity plays a big part in this in terms of expectation and aspiration. And you see bright-eyed and bushy-tailed year 7s and year 8s, and then year 10 and 11, if you're a middle-class white kid and you go a bit off the rails, you'll be okay. If you're not, if you're a poor kid, actually, colour isn't that important on this particular observation. If you're a poor kid and you go off a bit off the rails, it's very hard to get back on them again. Alex, what a debut. Have we had any non-first-time callers yet today? It's not de rigueur, and you don't have to mention it. 10:41 is the time. I used to play a game. How can I put this without...
Well, I used to play a game with other people in my profession, a private game, or with my sort of closest friends and confidants. And if a few years ago, when I was a little bit frustrated, I won't lie to you, you could probably tell if you were listening, I was a little bit frustrated that the work we were doing together wasn't sort of reaching a wider audience, wasn't getting a bigger kind of reception. Only temporarily frustrated, because you got to be grateful for what you've got, and that's the most important lesson I think anyone can learn in life sometimes. And I used to look at the people who were in places where I thought perhaps I would like to be, or perhaps where I should be. People in my profession who I thought, well, how have they got that? And I've not. And I'm not complaining, but it just used to bother or puzzle me a little bit. Thank the Lord it doesn't anymore, because I do pretty much... Right, you know what I'm saying. So what I used to do, I used to look at these three things, okay? And I called one of them chutzpah. Chutzpah, talent, hard work. And I'd look at some of these people... and I'd think, I don't think you've got much talent, but you've got chutzpah. I know for a fact that every single member of management over at, Crocus Productions is routinely getting messages from you and emails from you. And I used to notice it, and I hope this isn't #everyday sexism, but I'd notice it with good-looking girls more, because you'd sort of think, how the hell are you having lunch with the managing editor? How the hell are you having lunch with the commissioning editor? How the hell are you having lunch with so-and-so and so-and-so? And I thought, well, because you've asked. Chutzpah, and you can see it in this profession, just like yours. Every profession has this. The pushier you are, the more likely you are to be camouflaging a lack of talent. So I used to say to young people when I'd get talks at schools or whatever, talent, chutzpah, hard work. Tragically, the order in which they're important in the first sort of 10 to 15 years of a career is chutzpah, most important, confidence. Hard work, second most important. Now, theoretically, anyone can do that. The thing over which you have very little control is talent, the third most important thing on the list. I don't know if I'd agree with that now, but it used to work like a dream. You could actually just name the person and go, yep, chutzpah, and name another person, considerably more talented but less successful, and go, yep, there you go, talent. Martin's in Hove. Martin, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that it's entirely possible to come from nowhere and make a good life for yourself.
Oh, of course it is. No one's disputing that.
But the most important thing, I mean, I was an immigrant 6 years old from India in 1956. I've grown up, I've retired now as a chartered accountant and all sorts of strange things. My siblings have done incredibly well, but the most important thing for them was the family network. We didn't have any money, but the support that the network from our family was there. Whether we didn't have to ask. If you wanted something, you got it.
Like what? What do you mean? Not like a sort of mini motorbike and a year's supply of minstrels. What do you mean? If you wanted something, you got it.
You got it in terms of support. With
right.
Help you along. What can we do for you within the terms of what we have, and followed then by, I think, just hard work. Hard work. I didn't stop working for 50 years.
No. And and lower expectations, or a lower sense of entitlement as an immigrant family. That notion that I just...
Absolutely not.
Well, hang on. Let me explain what I mean by that. What I just said a minute ago was being grateful for what you've got. So what you were grateful for having was the opportunity. Perhaps those of us born here tend to take that a little bit for granted, and this would explain why in schools routinely it's children of immigrants that not only perform better but also drag up the standards of the rest of the school. But again, then you've got your Daily Express front pages saying the opposite.
Look, I don't know, you must have heard, I don't know how many times. Martin, if you want to get on in life, you're going to have to be, you're not white, you're going to have to work harder, you're going to have to try harder, and you're going to have to be better. It sounds ridiculous, but that kind of the mantra that I followed. And it just didn't stop me throughout life.
If you were starting again, and I appreciate you've done well, and you could choose one of these three genies, I could give you the talent genie, so you could be more talented than you are. I could give you the chutzpah genie, so you'd have that confidence, that social facility to be comfortable in any environment. Or I'd give you the hard work genie, which I sense you've already got anyway. Which one of those would you pick at the age of 21?
Chutzpah.
Yeah, you see? Can you teach it? Can you teach it?
I don't know.
I'll tell you what, Martin, if you can't teach it, then parents like mine who were throwing 10 grand a year at the problem were wasting their money. It's 10:46. I think I must have tuned into the wrong radio station, been on for 50 minutes, and no one's mentioned Donald Trump. Oh, no, I blew it. We are, you're right, quite right, taking a temporary reprieve from events in America. And I actually don't have Brexit on my list particularly prominently today as well. But in the interests, because I really do think this is my job, all this talk of post-truth politics and all these fake news sites and these ludicrous attempts to provide what some people call balance, but which I call bonkers. Galileo Galilei, having just explained why he has proven scientifically that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. Thank you very much, Mr. Galileo. And now here's a mad Catholic who wants to burn you at the stake to provide a little bit of balance. That's where we are now politically. So just in the interests of giving you the tools you need to make informed conclusions and decisions and manage your Brexit expectations. Boris Johnson claimed yesterday in an interview with, I think, a Czech or a Slovak newspaper that free movement was never fundamental to the EU treaties, free movement of people. I'm just going to read you Article 3C of the Treaty of Rome, the foundation stone of the European Union. You don't have to like it, but it's my job to make sure that you know it, okay? For the purposes set out in Article 2, the activities of the community shall include, as provided in the treaty and in accordance with the timetable set out therein, the abolition as between member states of obstacles to freedom of movement for persons, services and capital. That's 1957. So yet again, that entire mad debate featuring people saying, I never signed up for this, I only signed up for a trade agreement. That's the Treaty of Rome from 1957. That's the British Foreign Secretary talking out of his posterior. That's not news though, is it? Really? British Foreign Secretary talking out of his posterior? That's dog bites man stuff. British Foreign Secretary saying something true, really insightful and helpful. That's probably moving into man bites dog territory now. Dee is in Buckinghamshire to steer us back to the question of social mobility, expectations and success. Dee, what would you like to say?
Hello. I'm a bit nervous as well.
Don't be.
We adopted our son 3 years ago, or two and a half years ago.
Yes.
And when you go through the process, you are told all different things about your child. You're told about their development, and we had to see a paediatrician. In that meeting, they told us that he would probably not be able to talk. He'd need a speech therapist for quite a while.
Had a very tough start in life, did he?
He was severely neglected.
How old was he when he came to you?
2. Okay. 2.5.
Okay.
2.5. And he'd been moved around quite a lot.
I understand.
I can't tell you loads of things about him. But,
I completely understand. I really mean that. I don't understand much, but this I do. This issue I understand inside out.
So we were told that he probably wouldn't be able to speak, that he'd probably need help with reading and writing. He'd probably have a teaching assistant sitting next to him. And then at the end of the meeting, they actually, and we'd already read his file, we knew everything about him. And at the end of the meeting, they actually asked us, do you still want to adopt him?
Oh.
So after all the bad things, do you still want him? And of course, we'd already fallen in love with him. But I feel so strongly that he will succeed in life. Already, he's higher achieving than most of the children in his class. He can talk.
Is he at nursery or primary school?
He's in primary school now. He's in year 1.
Brilliant.
So, and in 2 years, he's turned his life around, and that's him.
Well, you have helped him turn his life around. But this is, as you know, because I mentioned my own background, it's nothing like your boys. I was 28 days old, and never got absolutely nothing to complain about, like most adoptees of my age. But you do wonder, I think, more than others, about how things would turn out differently if you were being supported by a different home, a different background. And
what concerns me is that children are sometimes put into a box. So, he was an adopted child that had been neglected. So they went down the checklist. Yeah, this will probably happen to him. This will probably happen to him. Those things won't happen to him because we won't let those things happen to him. And he's resilient. He'll get through and he'll achieve.
So, and people like you and me, and probably your son as he grows, will find it impossible quite to grasp the notion of people not thinking that background and parentage were the most important factors in their life, won't we? Because it seems to have defined everything. You never know, of course. It's like sliding doors, isn't it? If you hadn't got on that train, or you had got on that train.
And I don't know what's going to happen to him. He's only 5, so I can't say he's achieved everything in life yet. He's quite a lot. But, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know he won't.
But you know the difference that a loving, supportive home can make. I mean, Dee, thank you so much. I don't know what you were nervous about. Best of luck with everything. I tell you what, I know not everybody shares my interest in this issue, or Dee's for obvious reasons, but I attended an award ceremony at the Foundling Hospital run by the Adoption First charity a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, and oh man alive, when you see the children sometimes, again, like Dee, from backgrounds that you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy, and just blossoming and coming to fruition in the context of a truly loving and devoted family, you realise how important that is. But, you know me, bleeding heart, muesli munching liberal, I also want to know how we help the kids who don't get taken out of those scenarios, or are in scenarios not quite drastic enough to merit removal from birth families, but still constitute pretty straitened and difficult circumstances. How would you improve that? Well, when they get to school, social skills sounds a bit inadequate, but I think these things are really important. 10:56 is the time. Dee, thank you. Humza is in Stratford. Humza, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, basically, like I said, I'm 20 years old, obviously quite young, and I come from East London, an area that isn't, very rich, and my parents were never rich or anything, but they weren't poor, but they were never rich, and from a young age, I exactly knew what I wanted to do. I think the problem with the youth nowadays is that they get to a certain age in studies and they assume that they can't become the doctors, they can't become the lawyers because they don't have those grades, and then they just give up, and then they're just happy to work in a normal job, and they'll never really achieve. But me,
I sometimes feel like picking up on everything people say, but I don't want anyone listening to this who's not a lawyer or a doctor to feel that they haven't achieved. What you describe is a middle class condition, isn't it, where you equate somehow material success with success. I mean, some of the happiest people I know are the ones who couldn't really care less about material success as long as they've got enough. They're happy.
Yeah.
But I take your point. I know what you mean.
But I mean, I think for me personally, like I was always good in school, but when I got to A levels, I went completely the wrong way, and I failed my A levels. But I got back on my feet. I did a little course, and now I'm in a university, and I'm also working. But I think I learned more from employment because I started working when I was 17, and my first job was literally like a training sort of thing. You were supposed to earn this commission, and I didn't really earn much, but the skills I learned from there was, like you said, social skills, being able to greet people, being able to talk to people, being able to have a conversation. And because of that, I've been able to progress through different jobs. And I would say, I've done quite well for myself at my age. I've got my own business now, I'm at university, and I'm also working. So, I juggle quite a few things, but I do think it comes down to, the mindset.
Can you teach it? Could you teach it to a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old?
And I do think you can. I think the problem is that the education system doesn't teach that sort of stuff. It doesn't. I can tell you that because I've just come from that sort of environment.
No, but can you teach it? Could you teach it to a 15-year-old? Yeah.
Me personally, yeah, I do think so, because I've motivated quite a lot of young people just in my area, been able to speak to quite a few of youth, and they get quite motivated, just listen to, certain things, and I think you can teach it.
I hope you're right. I'll take your word for it in the meantime. It is, very hard to quantify, very hard to pin down. It's something to do with expectation and entitlement as well. Entitlement's become a very dirty word. I'd like everybody to have a sense of entitlement. Everybody. Unfortunately, if it's confined to minorities, usually quite privileged minorities, that sense of entitlement. Actually, it's not even privileged minorities. It's another horseshoe, isn't it? We talk about people at the bottom having a sense of entitlement because they think that, their lifestyle should be subsidised by taxpayers. Again, the numbers don't support the rhetoric, but these people do exist. You can watch Channel 5 to find them. And then people at the top of society who have a sense of entitlement, an entitlement to be supported by the state, or an entitlement to be absolutely at the top of the tree. I reckon 80% of us are in between the two.